The Museum of West African Art is set to open its first campus building, the MOWAA Institute in Benin City, Edo State.
The ground-penetrating radar lit up. Archaeologists stared at their screens, completely stunned. The data showed a massive, gridded network of structures buried just feet below modern-day Benin City. This wasn't a small settlement, it was a sprawling, planned metropolis. The MOWAA Archaeology Project, launched in 2022, has since uncovered thousands of artifacts that prove this kingdom was a global power hundreds of years ago. They found evidence of global trade, advanced engineering, and a dark secret from 1897. What they're finding is a rebuttal to history itself, and the world is finally being forced to listen. The find that changes everything. The year is 2022. In the heart of Benin City, Nigeria, a team of archaeologists is preparing to break ground. On the surface, it's just two unassuming plots of land set aside for the new Museum of West African Art. The plan is simple: a routine pre-construction dig. Check for any minor artifacts, document them, and let the builders move in. The team is expecting to find some pottery shards, maybe the outline of a few old mud brick homes. Nothing major. But here's the catch. This is Benin City. This is the former heart of one of the most powerful and mysterious kingdoms in African history. And the ground here doesn't just hold dirt, it holds secrets. Big ones. The moment the digging began, the routine part went right out the window. A shovel hit something solid. It wasn't a rock. It was red, packed, and perfectly flat. It was a brick, fired harder than anything they expected to find. This wasn't a small settlement. This was something else entirely. Led by joint Nigerian and British teams, which is a whole story in itself, the MOWAA Archaeology Project quickly realized they had stumbled onto the largest excavation in the region since the 1960s. What they found wasn't just a few pots, it was a stratigraphic saga. That's a fancy way of saying a story told in layers of earth. And this story spanned 800 years. They dug down, peeling back time. The deepest layers, from around 1200 AD, showed the first signs of life. Coarse pottery shards, etched with distinct chevron patterns. These were the remnants of the Proto-Edo people, the very first villagers who tilled the iron-rich soil a generation before the kingdom was even a thought. But as they moved up into the mid-levels from the 15th century onward, the story exploded. Get this, they uncovered the foundations of vast palace courtyards. These weren't mud huts. These were delineated by massive rammed earth walls, some of them over 6.5 feet thick. These walls were reinforced with laterite bricks, a kind of local iron-rich clay that had been fired at over 1,470 degrees Fahrenheit. Now let's pause on that. To fire bricks that hard, you need sophisticated kilns, the kind of technology that wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't an accident. This was advanced, intentional engineering. And here's a wild thought. Were these kilns just for bricks? Or were they part of the same secret, advanced knowledge that allowed them to become masters of metalworking? Some researchers now theorize that the brick makers and the bronze casters were part of a unified secret guild of fire masters who held the keys to the kingdom's technological boom. The dig site, covering nearly 13,000 square feet, was just one tiny part of a palace complex that once sprawled over an astonishing 24 acres. Think about that. That's the size of almost 20 professional football fields, and it was all meticulously planned. And the crazy part is the engineering. While cities like medieval London were still dumping raw sewage into the Thames and dealing with constant plague, Benin City had a planned, sophisticated infrastructure. This wasn't a haphazard jumble of buildings. LiDAR scans and ground-penetrating radar were cross-referenced with the dig, and they mapped out a precise grid of drainage channels. We're talking V-shaped ditches, about 20 inches deep, expertly designed to funnel the intense monsoon rains away from the elite residences and public squares. This system prevented the kind of flooding and disease that crippled other cities at the time, even in Europe. One of these ancient drainage channels held another secret, a cache of iron slag. This is the industrial waste, the byproduct of bloomery furnaces. Analysis showed they were smelting ore at temperatures topping 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit. This was the industrial heart of the kingdom, the guild workshops that churned out the precursors to the world-famous Benin bronzes. In these layers, they found copper alloy bells and armlets, traded as far as Ife and even picked up by trans-Saharan caravans. This was already a massive deal. The finds were rewriting the timeline of West African industry, but the real tremor, the find that sent shockwaves through the entire field of history, hit in September of 2025. A trench sliced through the long-lost fabled heart of the Obas or King's Palace. A palace that was thought to be completely destroyed, turned to ash and memory by British torches in 1897. There they found the foundation trenches, and what most people don't realize is how they were built. They were aligned perfectly to the cardinal points: north, south, east, west. This is the exact same sophisticated solar alignment seen in Great Zimbabwe, hundreds of miles away, proving a shared advanced understanding of astronomy and cosmology. And here's where the theories get wild. Was this just for decoration, or was the Oba's palace something more? Some historians looking at this evidence are now speculating that the entire palace complex was designed as a kind of cosmic engine. A machine built to align with the sun and moon, a place for the Oba, who was seen as a divine link between the sky and the earth, to channel celestial power for the good of his kingdom. It wasn't just a home, it may have been an antenna to the gods. And amid the rubble of that cosmic palace, the treasures were staggering. 200 fragments of ivory intricately carved with leopard motifs, the symbol of the Oba analysis of the tusks, showed they were sourced from forests in Calabar, hundreds of miles away, brought in via complex river bark trade routes. They found piles of coral beads. But here's the wow factor. These beads were imported from the Indian Ocean. That's thousands of miles away, across the continent, or by a sea route nobody knew they had access to. These were strung into royal regalia so heavy they would have weighed over 11 pounds. Imagine the power, the sheer wealth of a king who could casually wear 11 pounds of treasure imported from the other side of the world. They even found a shattered ivory salt cellar, its base inlaid with snail shell mosaics, depicting none other than Oba Iwer the Great, the legendary king from the mid-1400s. And here's the kicker. This is the same king credited with being the architect of the city's legendary massive walls. The team used carbon-14 dating to pin these finds to the 16th century, the golden age of the Benin Kingdom, and then they did the final test, the one that connected this buried past to the stolen present. Using XRF spectrometry, they analyzed the metal composition of items found in the dig and compared them to the famous looted bronzes held in museums in London and Berlin. The result? A perfect match. The alloy was identical, 85% copper from Akan mines alloyed with traces of zinc. That zinc is the smoking gun. Zinc is incredibly difficult to isolate. It vaporizes at a relatively low temperature, so to alloy it with copper you need an advanced, secret process. And this specific zinc is anomalous to West Africa. This suggests a complex, multi-stage trade link that reached all the way to the Silk Road, likely through Portuguese intermediaries who then traded that metal back to Benin. This single dig proved it all. The myths were true. The kingdom wasn't just advanced for Africa, it was a globally connected, meticulously engineered, artistically brilliant metropolis. But this city wasn't just a rumor, it was protected by a wonder of the world. Benin's earthen fury. So, here's the deal. For decades, the story of Benin was focused almost entirely on the bronzes, the art that was stolen in 1897. Everyone's obsessed with the bronzes. But the art was just one symptom of the kingdom's greatness. The MOWAA digs confirmed the sophisticated heart of the city. But what most people still don't realize is the sheer scale of the city those digs were in. We're not talking about a wall. We're talking about the walls of Benin, and that's putting it lightly. This wasn't just a single wall around a palace. It was the largest earthwork in the world. Period. This isn't some New Age theory. In the 1970s, the Guinness Book of World Records cited it as the largest earthwork on the planet, an achievement carried out prior to the mechanical era. And then the world just forgot. It faded from the books, dismissed and ignored. Let's talk numbers because they are staggering. They sound like science fiction. The walls of Benin, known locally as Iya, were a complex, mind-bending system of moats and ramparts. Not one wall, but a series of them, built of rammed earth. The inner wall, the one protecting the Oba's palace and the city's heart, the very place the MOWAA team is digging, was up to 66 feet high in some places. That's a 6-story building, and it was surrounded by a massive moat, or ditch, just as deep. This single inner wall was a monumental fortress, but that was just the inner wall. That was just the start. Beyond that, a vast, sprawling network of secondary walls and moats stretched out into the countryside. These walls weren't just random, they were a grid. They connected over 500 villages, enclosing an area of 2,510 square miles. And when you add up the entire length of this interconnected system, the total comes to an estimated 9,900 miles. Let that sink in. 9,900 miles. The Great Wall of China, the one everyone knows, is officially listed at about 1,900 miles long for its mainline wall. The entire Benin system was over 4 times longer than the Great Wall of China. To put that in perspective, that's like building a wall from New York City to Los Angeles and back, and then doing it all over again. This wasn't just a pile of dirt, this was a masterpiece of social engineering, and it was all built by hand. No bulldozers, no excavators, no modern machinery, just shovels, baskets, and millions of people. The project is estimated to have taken 150 million man-hours to complete. It was built over hundreds of years, starting as early as 800 AD and being massively expanded by Oba Iwara the Great in the 1500s, the same king on that ivory salt cellar found in the dig. This proves the oral histories were true, and this brings us to a massive, wild theory. Was this wall just for defense? 9,900 miles is insane for just keeping people out. It's an impossible border to patrol. So what if its purpose was something else entirely? Some researchers are now floating a radical idea. What if the wall, the Iya, was also a spiritual boundary, a spirit fence on a Godzilla-like scale? In traditional Edo belief, the wilderness was a place of chaos and dangerous spirits. The wall then was a way to create a massive 9,000-mile-long sacred circle, a safe zone of order and civilization magically blessed by the Oba to keep out not just human enemies, but supernatural forces. It wasn't just a wall, it was a giant kingdom-sized amulet. And another theory, how was it even built? How do you organize a project that takes 150 million man-hours? Without computers, without spreadsheets, without modern communications? The logistics are mind-boggling. This implies a level of social control and organization that almost seems impossible. Did the Obas use a forgotten form of psychological control? Or was the population massive, far larger than the estimated 2 million? What if Benin was a super kingdom of 10 million people, a sprawling megalopolis that we have completely underestimated? The walls also served a social purpose. The main city was divided into distinct quarters, separated by these earthen walls with massive gates controlling access. Each quarter was home to a specific guild, and there were over 30 of them. This wasn't a free-for-all. This was a managed society. You had the Igbasamwan, the ivory and wood carvers. You had the Ogun Aranamwan, the brass smiths, who held the secret of the lost wax casting. You had the blacksmiths, the weavers, the potters, the leather workers, and even the royal tattooists. The walls kept the city organized, controlled trade, and physically showed the power of the Oba. Each guild had its own section, its own leaders, its own secrets, passed down from father to son. The walls created cities within the city, a perfectly ordered and controlled society. So when the first Europeans, the Portuguese, arrived in 1485, they were stunned. They didn't find a primitive village. They found this. They found a massive, thriving city, the heart of the powerful kingdom of Benin, a city protected by the largest fortress on earth. They called it Great Benin. The Portuguese captain Lourenço Pinto wrote in awe, describing a city where the streets, as he described them, were long, wide, and straight, laid out in a perfect grid. He reported that the king's palace was as large as the entire city of Haarlem in Holland, and that it was decorated with bronze plaques. They saw a society with a complex legal system, a powerful standing army, and a booming economy built on trade in palm oil, ivory, and those exquisite copper alloy artworks. They saw a civilization that was, in many ways, their equal, if not their superior. So the new MOWAA digs are so revolutionary because they are the first major modern archaeological confirmation of what was inside this legendary world wonder level fortress. They are digging up the proof of the very society that had the wealth, organization, and sheer manpower to pull off the single largest building project in human history. IT proves the stories weren't exaggerated. They might have been undersold. A city this powerful, this vast, this well-engineered, it doesn't just vanish. A wonder of the world 4 times longer than China's wall doesn't just get forgotten by history. So what happened? The answer lies in fire, gunfire, and a secret held in soldiers' diaries. Proof of the invasion. In January of 1897, a British trade delegation led by Acting Consul General James Phillips decided he was going to force his way into Benin City. He wanted to convince the Oba to open up the kingdom to British trade, specifically palm oil and ivory. The Oba's chief sent multiple messages warning him not to come. It was a sacred period, the Igwe festival, and the Oba could not see any foreigners. Phillips was an arrogant man. He wrote to his superiors in London that the kingdom was a barrier to trade and that a show of force was needed. He brushed off the warnings as superstition. He marched on the city with a small force and a brass band, expecting to intimidate the Oba. He was wrong. The delegation was ambushed by Benin's warriors. Phillips and most of his party were taken out. The British Empire, the largest in the world, was humiliated. And more importantly, it finally had the excuse it had been looking for. The desire for Benin's wealth was no secret. Phillips' demise was the moral green light they needed to take it all by force. The response was swift and terrifying. Just 1 month later, in February, they launched the punitive expedition. A force of 1,200 Royal Marines and sailors under the command of Admiral Sir Harry Rawson set sail. They were armed with the most advanced weapons of the day: Maxim machine guns, heavy artillery, and thousands of Martini Henry rifles. The official story, the one that went into the history books, was a simple military action. It was punishment. It was to avenge the fallen delegation and end a savage kingdom that they claimed was built on blood rituals. But here's the catch. The real story, the one that details what they found and what they did, was hidden for decades in the private letters, official reports, and diaries of the very soldiers and officers on that expedition. This is the deathbed confession part of the story. These men, as they grew old, reflected on what they witnessed. And it wasn't a savage wasteland, it was a civilization. Captain Alan Boisregan, one of the few survivors of the first incident, wrote about the city he had seen before. The houses are all built of red clay. They are enclosed with a high wall of the same material. He described long, wide streets. Another officer, Commander R.H. Bacon, the expedition's intelligence officer, wrote a report. He described the city's order and wealth. He wrote, "The walls are a wonderful piece of work. The town is very well built." But what they all wrote about, what really stunned them, was the art. They walked into the Oba's palace and their jaws hit the floor. They found a city filled with thousands of intricate, sophisticated sculptures in bronze, ivory, and wood. They were everywhere. On the pillars of the palace, on the sacred altars, in the storehouses. This was art that rivaled anything being made in Europe. It was masterful. And what did they do with this art? This priceless record of a civilization? They stole it. The expedition wasn't just punitive, it was an act of systematic, organized looting. The soldiers were ordered to ransack the palace and every building they could find. They stripped over 3,000 priceless artifacts. Some historians say the number is closer to 10,000. These Benin bronzes, as they came to be known, were carted off. They were piled up in the mud like scrap. They were shipped back to London, and here's the most cynical part. They were sold at auction to museums in London, Berlin, and New York to pay for the cost of the expedition. The invasion literally paid for itself by selling the stolen goods. And then, after the city was emptied of its treasure, Admiral Rawson gave the final order: burn it. Burn it all to the ground. For days, the city burned. The 6-story high walls were breached with explosives. The palace, with its 24 acres of courtyards, was set ablaze. The guild houses, the homes, the markets, all of it. They turned Great Benin into an inferno. Now let's jump back to the MOWAA dig in 2022. The archaeologists didn't just find the 16th century golden age. As they dug through the layers just below the modern surface, they hit the post-1897 stratum, and it was a layer of pure destruction. The soil was black, scarred with a thick, uniform layer of charcoal. It was the archaeological proof of the Great Fire, and mixed in with that ash, they found the smoking guns. They found spent Martini Henry bullet casings, the exact type used by the British expedition. They found fragments of pulverized glass from British gin bottles dropped by the soldiers as they looted the city. The dig provided the cold, hard physical evidence to back up the diaries. It was the crime scene, perfectly preserved in the earth. And this leads to a chilling, wild theory. Why burn the city so completely? Why not just occupy it? Theory: it wasn't just to punish, it was to erase the evidence. The soldiers and commanders saw a city that was so sophisticated, so well-ordered, with art so magnificent that it shattered their own propaganda. They couldn't let the world see that this savage kingdom was more organized than parts of London. It was a cover-up. They had to destroy the proof of this advanced civilization to maintain their dark continent narrative, the lie that justified their entire colonial project. But the crazy part is, they found something else in that layer of ash, something that flips the script on the whole narrative. The old story was of a savage kingdom, passively conquered and destroyed. The new finds tell a story of defiance. In that same layer of ash and bullets, archaeologists found iron spearheads. But they weren't the traditional ornate Benin design. They had been reforged hastily from scraps of metal left by the expedition. This was a guerrilla war. They found ritual pits, dug after the destruction, filled with cowrie shells, invoking Ogun, the god of iron, for a war they had not yet given up on. And then the most wow factor find of all, a brass manila, which was a form of currency used in the region. But this one was stamped with the profile of Queen Victoria, and the Benin artisans who found it had taken it, melted it down, and reforged it into an anti-colonial amulet. Think about that. This wasn't just a political act, this was magical warfare. In their belief system, they were taking the very image of the empress who had destroyed them, melting her power and turning it into a charm to fight back. This wasn't a passive defeat, this was a story of defiance. The MOWAA digs unearthed not just the crime, but the first act of resistance against the empire that committed it. This proof of a sophisticated, defiant kingdom completely rewrites the official history. Why the museums are scared. So, here's the deal. Why does this one dig, confirming a city and a wall that were already kind of known, shake the entire field of history? Because it's not about discovering something new, it's about proving something that was deliberately and systematically denied for over a century. What most people don't realize is that the story of savage Africa was an invention. It was a narrative, a piece of propaganda created specifically to justify colonialism and the theft of an entire continent's resources. Academics in Europe, like the great philosopher Hegel, famously wrote that Africa is no historical part of the world. It had no history, no development, no story worth telling. The idea of the Dark Continent was a lie built to make the invasion of places like Benin seem like a civilizing mission rather than the violent theft it actually was. And the MOWAA digs are the final, undeniable rebuttal to that lie. Let's look at what the finds prove. First, the engineering. Historians at Oxford and Lagos University are now recalibrating the entire timeline of Africa's Dark Ages. The finds of the hydraulic genius at Benin, those 12.4-mile-long moats, which weren't just for defense but were also stocked with Nile perch via complex canal locks, show a level of engineering that predates similar hydraulic systems in Europe by centuries. This technology wasn't imported. It was invented here, and it likely influenced other kingdoms like Ife and Owo. Second, the global trade. The old myth was that African kingdoms were isolated and tribal. The MOWAA finds proved this was nonsense. The 11 pounds of coral beads came from the Indian Ocean. The copper came from the Akan mines, hundreds of miles away. And that zinc, the one mixed into the bronzes? That's the real kicker. As we said, it's hard to make, and the source suggests it came via the trans-Saharan trade routes connecting Benin to North Africa, the Middle East, and all the way to Asia. This wasn't a lost kingdom. It was a central hub in a global trade network, and this leads to a new, wild theory. Just how far did this trade go? With the discovery of Indian Ocean beads, some are now asking, did Benin traders in their own massive river barks make it to the Indian Ocean themselves? Did they have a lost trade language that connected the entire continent from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean? The evidence is just starting to be pieced together. Third, and this is the biggest one, the art itself. The most subversive discovery is about the famous Benin bronzes. For 100 years, they were displayed in Western museums simply as primitive art. They were beautiful, sure, but they were seen as savage decorations. But the new digs, combined with new analysis of the over 500 conserved plaques, have confirmed a stunning theory. They aren't just art. They are records. They are a library. They are a form of non-alphabetic writing, a complex hieroglyphic system of symbols and figures that tells the story of the kingdom. Many of the plaques are not just pretty pictures. They are complex edicts, historical chronicles, and even tribute tallies. They are a ledger system. One plaque, for example, might record a tribute of 1,000 cowries per guild to fund the king's standing army. An army, by the way, that numbered over 10,000 soldiers. Another plaque depicting a king and his attendants isn't just a portrait, it's a legal document showing the line of succession. This is proof of a complex, literate, bureaucratic society. They didn't write on paper, which would rot in the humid climate. They wrote in bronze, they cast their history in metal that would last forever. And here's the wild theory that changes everything. What if this is the Rosetta Stone of West Africa? By finding these plaques in situ in their original archaeological context in the ruins of the palace, we can now for the first time figure out how to read them. We can see which plaque was in which room. We can start to crack the code. The MOWAA dig isn't just finding art, it's finding the key to a lost language. This is why the dig is so important. It's not just finding old walls. As MOWAA's director, Peju Laiwola, declared, "We've exhumed not ruins but rebuttals to the empty continent lie." And now the world is being forced to act. The impact on repatriation has been immediate. In October, Germany pledged to return over 100 more bronzes, specifically citing the new digs as proof of their origin and the unbroken lineage of the Benin Kingdom. The finds are a legal and moral receipt, proving exactly where the stolen goods came from and who they belong to.
The DNA of Obasake is what? Betrayal, serial betrayal, and ungratefulness. If you go and check the DNA of Godwin Obasake, what you see in that DNA is betrayal, serial betrayal, and ungratefulness.